Ladies and gentlemen, our today's chief guest is a renowned personality of our financial industry, Mr. Shukat Tareen, the Federal Minister for Finance and Economic Affairs, and I will request Mr. Tareen for his address.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sayyid Asad Ali Shah, Mr. Ahmed Saeed, Mr. Sheikh Hafiz, Mr. Asad Umar, Mr. Chitraka, Mr. Shabarzadi, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu Alaikum. The American economist and Nobel laureate Paul Samuelson recently pointed out in an interview how mistaken Milton Friedman's notion was that market system can regulate itself. On the contrary, the Keynesian idea that fiscal policy and deficit spending have a major role to play in guiding a market economy is being once again widely hailed. As Mr. Shah rightly pointed out, financial ups and downs and economic bubbles have occurred forever. What makes this meltdown different is how it has led to a loss in confidence in the market economy and warrants the question whether the clock has run out on the market economy. Perhaps the biggest damage was done by the financial products, so unnecessarily complex that they defied even bankers and regulators and created a mass sense of insecurity and an irreversible breach of public trust. By March 2009, the ADB had estimated that financial assets worldwide had fallen by more than $50 trillion. Financial innovation of the last 2 decades had reshaped the way markets worked, but this time around, innovation outwitted everyone. In fact, it gave way to lax regulation, excessively loose monetary policy, fraudulent borrowing, and managerial oversight. Another trend that emerged was that banks started to sell their credit risks to third-party investors and began to rely heavily on computerized systems to measure that risk in the mistaken belief that the dispersion of credit risk would make the financial system more resilient. Affectionately known as the CDO of ABS, collateralized debt obligations of asset-backed securities, inundated international markets. In the absence of a market price for them, nearly $450 billion worth of these highly specialized instruments remain untraded. With high credit ratings, these CDOs became popular with investors and generated huge profits for the banks. The system began to unravel when the subprime mortgage crisis hit the U.S. housing market in July 2007. As agencies such as Standard & Poor's cut ratings for mortgage-linked products, the strongest banks, Citi, Merrill Lynch, UBS, they all realized to their detriment that the supposedly AAA-rated CDOs they had been stockpiling were worth only half of their face value. With Lehman's bankruptcy, the house of cards finally fell. Governments around the world stepped in to insure banks against losses on their toxic assets as investors lost confidence in the market. Though things seem to be looking up, the consensus is that capitalism needs to be effectively regulated, and it will take a long time to rebuild confidence in the global financial system. Advanced countries have probably seen the worst of the financial crisis, but unfortunately it has now moved to emerging countries, creating financial and exchange rate crisis in its wake. Emerging and developing economies additionally suffer from